On a random morning, a child saw something that made his father tremble. A simple young girl carried, without knowing it, the marks of a lost love. An unlikely encounter would uncover secrets that time tried to hide. When the past and present collided, everything changed. Before you dive into this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. On an ordinary Saturday, in a simple restaurant downtown, a widowed father and his young son tried to fill the void left by the absence of wife and mother with coffee and fresh bread. The loss, caused by a tragic car accident 2 years earlier, still weighed heavily on their hearts, but the routine of going out for breakfast had become a way to move forward. While playing with his fork, the little boy looked up and, with the purity of someone who sees beyond appearances, pointed to a young woman serving tables. With enthusiasm and a hint of disbelief, he exclaimed, "Daddy, that waitress looks just like Mommy." The man, overcome by a strange sensation, turned and felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The woman across the room didn't just resemble his deceased wife. She was the spitting image of her. Hair, eyes, smile, even the way she walked. Everything brought back the presence of the woman he had buried with so much suffering, trying to control the avalanche of feelings to avoid. Frightening his son, he decided to approach her. With a trembling voice, he asked if they could talk. The young woman, identified only by a tag with a simple name, smiled kindly, unaware of the whirlwind that was about to unfold. When he explained that she resembled his deceased wife, the young woman frowned in surprise, but soon she shared something that left the man even more astonished. She had been adopted as a small child and had always known she had an older sister from whom she'd been separated. Was it possible? Could the woman he had loved and lost have had a sister he never knew about? In silence, he searched his memory for the few times his wife had mentioned her difficult past and the separation from a sister she had never been able to find. Robert Sanders, a 38-year-old architect, never imagined that a simple coffee outing with his son Michael, just 6 years old, would completely change the course of their lives. Since Marianne, his wife, had passed away after the tragic accident, he had dedicated himself entirely to raising the boy and keeping alive the memory of the woman he had loved so much. The waitress's name was Elizabeth. She was 26 years old and had been working at that modest restaurant for only 3 months. Recently arrived in the city after finishing her degree in education, she was seeking financial stability while trying to find a position at a school. What she didn't expect was that her past, full of gaps and unanswered questions, would begin to reveal itself through this strange encounter. "I don't even know why I'm telling this to a stranger," said Elizabeth, pouring more coffee for Robert, "but I've always felt an inexplicable emptiness. My adoptive parents are wonderful. They gave me everything they could, but I always knew I had a sister. Our photos together were all I had left of her." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. Marianne rarely spoke about her childhood. When she did, she would only vaguely mention being separated from someone important during a turbulent period of her life. He had always respected her silence, understanding that some wounds are too deep to be reopened. "Could we meet after your shift?" asked Robert, trying to maintain his composure. "I have some photographs that you might want to see." Michael observed this interaction with curious eyes, still convinced that this pretty woman was somehow connected to the mother he could barely remember. While they waited, the boy drew in his little notebook what appeared to be a family. Himself, his father, and 2 female figures holding hands. When Elizabeth's shift ended at 2 in the afternoon, Robert had already taken Michael to his paternal grandmother's house. Mrs. Celeste, a grey-haired lady with a welcoming smile who, despite her own grief for the loss of her daughter-in-law, had become the family's safe harbor. "Where did you meet this young woman, Robert?" asked Mrs. Celeste, intrigued by her son's urgency. "It's complicated to explain, Mom. Maybe it's just an incredible coincidence, but I need to find out." The sunny afternoon framed the municipal park where they had arranged to meet. Elizabeth arrived punctually, now wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her brown hair loose in the wind, exactly as Marianne used to wear hers. Robert brought with him a photo album worn by time and constant handling. They sat on a wooden bench, the autumn sun warming their faces while dried leaves danced around them. "Before I show you anything, I need you to tell me more about this sister," said Robert, his heart racing. Any detail could be important. Elizabeth took a deep breath, her eyes reflecting distant memories she could barely reach. "I was only 3 when I was adopted. From what my adoptive parents told me, we were separated during a complicated process of family dissolution. My sister was 7 years older, and all I know is that her name was Marianne." The name fell like lightning upon Robert. His hands trembled as he opened the album to the first page, where a photograph showed Marianne at 16, smiling shyly in front of a modest house. "It's her," whispered Elizabeth, touching the photograph with her fingertips. "I have an almost identical photo to this one, except in mine, I'm just a child in her arms." The coincidence was too great to ignore. Robert turned a few pages, showing Marianne at different stages of her life. Her graduation from architecture school where they had met, their wedding day, Marianne pregnant, caressing her belly with that smile he missed so much. "She passed away 2 years ago," said Robert, his voice choked with emotion. "She never mentioned details about her biological family. She only said there were wounds she preferred not to reopen." Elizabeth wiped away a tear that insisted on streaming down her face. "All my life I searched for her. I even hired detectives when I started working, but I never got any concrete leads. I moved to this city by chance, after receiving an internship offer at a local school that ended up not materializing." "Chance?" questioned Robert, looking at the sky as if seeking some divine answer. "Or perhaps something more?" That afternoon stretched for hours as they both shared stories about Marianne. For Robert, it was like rediscovering the woman he had loved from a new perspective. For Elizabeth, it was finally getting to know the sister that fate had denied her for so long. When they realized the sun was beginning to set, Robert invited Elizabeth to meet Michael and Mrs. Celeste. "My son sensed something in you immediately. Children have that perception that we adults lose over time." Robert's apartment was just a few blocks away, a cozy space decorated with feminine touches that evidenced Marianne's presence, even in her physical absence. Photographs of her adorned the walls, and small personal objects still occupied strategic spaces, as if waiting for her return. Mrs. Celeste, upon seeing Elizabeth enter through the door, dropped the cup she was holding. Michael immediately ran to the young woman, hugging her legs with the naturalness that only children possess. "You came back to have dinner with us, Auntie?" he asked innocently, once again confusing her with the image of his mother that he kept in his childish memories. Robert quickly explained the situation to his mother, who alternated looks between disbelief and hope. "It's extraordinary," said Mrs. Celeste, holding Elizabeth's hands. "When Robert told me, I thought he was fantasizing out of longing. But now I see, it's as if a part of her had returned to us." During the improvised dinner that Mrs. Celeste prepared, they shared more stories. Elizabeth told about her happy childhood with her adoptive parents in a small town, her dreams of becoming a teacher, and how she had always felt an inexplicable void, a feeling of belonging somewhere else. Robert, in turn, shared how he had met Marianne in college, falling in love with her determination and the way she fought to build a better future, despite the difficult past she rarely mentioned. She had frequent nightmares, he revealed. Sometimes she would wake up calling for someone. "Now I understand. It was for you." It was already past midnight when Elizabeth realized she needed to go. They exchanged phone numbers and addresses, promises to see each other again the next day. Before saying goodbye, Elizabeth asked to see Michael's room. The fur boy was already sleeping deeply, hugging a worn teddy bear. Next to his bed, a photograph of Marianne smiled serenely. Elizabeth felt something break inside her as she realized what she had lost, not just the opportunity to reunite with her sister, but to know this nephew, to be part of this family. "I'm sorry I didn't arrive sooner," she whispered, more to herself than to Robert, who was watching from the door. "You arrived exactly when you should have," he answered, with a conviction that surprised them both. "And that's what matters now." As she left the apartment, a light rain was beginning to fall. Robert insisted on accompanying her home, but she politely refused, needing time to process everything she had discovered. "Tomorrow I'll be at the restaurant at the usual time," promised Robert. "If you want, we can go to the cemetery afterward." "I know it sounds strange, but—" "It's not strange," interrupted Elizabeth. "It's exactly what I need to do, say goodbye and at the same time begin to get to know her." As she walked home under the light rain, Elizabeth felt as if a weight she had carried her entire life was beginning to dissipate. For 26 years, she had sought answers about her origins, about her lost sister. Now, in a single day, the universe conspired to reveal not only Marianne's fate, but to introduce her to a family that, in some mysterious way, already seemed to be hers as well. Robert watched her move away down the wet street, her silhouette resembling Marianne so much that for a moment he questioned his own sanity. Was he projecting onto Elizabeth, the woman he had lost? Or was this the beginning of something new, a chance to heal old wounds and create new memories? When he closed the door, he found Mrs. Celeste sitting in the living room, leafing through another photo album. "She has the same eyes," commented the lady, "the same way of tilting her head when she's thoughtful." "What do you think of all this, Mum?" asked Robert, sitting beside her. "I think some losses are never completely explained, son, and that some encounters seem guided by something greater than ourselves. This girl has come to you for some reason." As the rain intensified outside, Robert thought about how a simple Saturday breakfast had triggered a sequence of events he could never have predicted. The void left by Marianne's departure would never be completely filled, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was room for new beginnings. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up before the alarm clock even rang. She had slept little, her mind filled with images, fragments of memories and new information that struggled to find their place. Sitting on the bed in her small rented apartment, she observed the yellowed photograph she kept on the bedside table. Herself, still a baby, in the arms of a girl of approximately 10 years old. Marianne, her sister. For so many years, that image had been her only link to a nebulous past. Now suddenly that connection had a name, a history, and even a family that for some inexplicable reason seemed willing to welcome her. She prepared for work with special care that morning. She knew that Robert and Michael would appear at the restaurant as they had promised. As she tied her hair back, she noticed with strangeness the similarities she had never perceived before. The shape of the eyes, the discreet smile, even the way of furrowing her brow when she was concentrated, all identical to Marianne's photos she had seen the day before. The restaurant was particularly busy for a Sunday morning. Elizabeth attended to the tables efficiently, but her eyes constantly drifted to the door awaiting their arrival. At 9 o'clock sharp, Robert entered hand in hand with Michael, who brought a colorful drawing made especially for her. "I drew you, Daddy, Grandma, and me in the park," explained the boy proudly, handing over the paper where 4 smiling figures held hands under a bright yellow sun. Elizabeth felt a lump in her throat when she realized that the boy already included her in his small world, without reservations or questions. She thanked him with a hug and promised to frame the drawing as soon as she got home. "We can't take up too much of your time now," said Robert, noticing the intense movement. "But we would like to pick you up after your shift, if that's okay with you." "I'll be waiting," she replied, feeling a mixture of anxiety and expectation she hadn't experienced in a long time. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of orders, bills, and automatic smiles. Her boss, Mrs. Carmen, a middle-aged woman who ran the restaurant with a firm hand but a generous heart, noticed her distraction. "Is there a problem, Elizabeth? You seem to be on another planet today." Summarizing the events of the last 24 hours seemed impossible, but Elizabeth tried. "I discovered yesterday that my sister, the one I've been looking for all my life, lived in this city. Unfortunately, she has already passed away, but I met her husband and son by chance right here in the restaurant." Mrs. Carmen looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and understanding. "Life has these things, my child. Sometimes it denies us for years what we most desire, only to place it in our path when we least expect it." She paused and added, "If you need to leave early today, that's not a problem." Elizabeth thanked her, but preferred to complete her full schedule. She needed that routine to anchor herself amid the emotional storm she was experiencing. At 3 o'clock sharp, Robert parked in front of the restaurant. Michael wasn't with him this time. "I left him with my mother," he explained when he noticed Elizabeth's questioning look. "I thought you might want to go to the cemetery first, and I didn't want to expose him to more sadness." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for his sensitivity. During the car ride, a comfortable silence established itself between them, interrupted only when Robert pointed out some significant place. "That's where I met Marianne. She liked to read in that park on Sundays. That was our favorite restaurant for special dates. The cemetery was on a gentle hill on the outskirts of the city, a serene place, with ancient trees providing shade and a constant wind that seemed to whisper stories of intertwined lives." Robert guided her between tombstones and monuments until they reached a simple but well-kept place where fresh flowers indicated recent visits. Marianne Sanders' name was engraved on a white marble plaque, along with the dates that marked her earthly passage, 1982-2023, only 41 years. A simple phrase completed the epitaph, "Love endures beyond time." Elizabeth knelt before the grave, touching with trembling fingers the name of the sister she had sought for so long. The tears she had contained since the day before finally found freedom, silently descending down her face. "I never gave up looking for you," she whispered, as if Marianne could hear her. "And now that I've found you, you're no longer here." Robert kept himself a few steps away, respecting that intimate moment. He observed how Elizabeth's posture, her profile against the light of the setting sun, evoked vivid memories of Marianne. It was disconcerting and comforting at the same time. After a few minutes in silence, Elizabeth stood up and turned to him. "You said she had nightmares and called for someone during her sleep. Did she ever mention the name Beth?" Robert closed, his eyes searching his memory. Yes, sometimes, especially when she was pregnant with Michael, the nightmares worsened. She would wake up calling for Beth and then cry. When I asked, she only said it was someone she had left behind. "She didn't forget me," murmured Elizabeth, a sad smile playing on her lips. "Everyone called me Elizabeth, but for her I was always Beth." On the way back, Robert suggested they stop at a cafe. There were more stories to share, more pieces of the puzzle to fit together. They chose a discreet table at the back of the establishment, where 2 cups of steaming tea created an atmosphere conducive to confidences. "There's one thing I didn't mention yesterday," said Robert, his countenance suddenly serious. "In the accident that took Marianne, she was on her way to a meeting with a social worker. There were papers scattered in the car, documents for searching for missing persons." Elizabeth's heart accelerated. "You think she was looking for me?" "I'm almost certain. In the previous months, she would spend hours on the internet, always closing the pages when I approached. Then she started making calls in the afternoon, when she thought I was at the office." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I think she had finally found a concrete lead about you, Elizabeth, and she was going to confirm it when..." He didn't need to complete the sentence. The cruel irony of fate hovered between them. At the moment when the sisters could finally reunite, they were permanently separated by the accident. "If I had arrived in the city a few weeks earlier," began Elizabeth, but Robert gently interrupted her. "We can't live on what-ifs, Elizabeth. Believe me, I've spent the last 2 years torturing myself with possibilities. If I had insisted on accompanying her that day, if we had chosen another route, if the weather hadn't been rainy, this only destroys us from within." She nodded, recognizing the wisdom in those words. "What comforts me," continued Robert, "is knowing that somehow her wish came true. You're here, you've met Michael, and now you're part of our lives." "I barely know you," responded Elizabeth, a sudden timidity tinging her voice. "But Michael already adores you. My mother has found in you a piece of the daughter-in-law she loved so much, and He hesitated, seeking the right words. "I feel like you're the missing link to help us move forward, without forgetting Marianne, but learning to live with her absence." That night, Robert invited her to dinner at his house, Mrs. Celeste had prepared a special meal, and Michael was eager to show his room and his toys to his new aunt. The atmosphere was one of strange familiarity, as if Elizabeth had always belonged to that space, to those people. After dinner, when Michael was already in bed, Mrs. Celeste brought a carved wooden box that Elizabeth hadn't noticed before. "Marianne kept her most precious memories here," explained the lady. "Perhaps there's something that might help you better understand your past." With reverent hands, Elizabeth opened the box. On top, there was a yellowed envelope containing newspaper clippings about children who disappeared or were separated by the adoption system in the 1990s. Beneath that, a small hospital bracelet with the name Elizabeth Oliver, 07 to 23, 1998. Her original birth certificate. "She never forgot your true birthday," commented Robert, observing the date. "She always became melancholic on that day." Continuing the exploration, Elizabeth found an old diary with Marianne's childish handwriting. In the first pages, anguished accounts of a 10-year-old girl who promised herself to find the little sister taken for adoption. Several entries ended with the same phrase, "I'll find you, Beth, I promise." Tears blurred Elizabeth's vision as she leafed through those pages that revealed a love and determination that had crossed decades. In the last entry, dated just 3 days before the fatal accident, Marianne had written, "After so many years, I finally have a concrete lead. A social worker from Riverside confirmed that the records match what I'm looking for. We've scheduled a meeting to verify the documentation. If all goes well, in a few days I'll be able to hug my Beth again. I can't wait to introduce her to Robert and Michael. Our family will finally be complete." The silence that followed the reading was broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Mrs. Celeste discreetly wiped away her tears, while Robert watched the rain that was beginning to fall outside, as if the sky itself shared in that contained emotion. "She never made it to that meeting," Elizabeth finally said, closing the diary with reverence. "No, the accident happened on the highway, on the way to Riverside," confirmed Robert. A sudden revelation hit Elizabeth like lightning. "Riverside is where I grew up. My adoptive parents still live there." "Then you were really close to reuniting," concluded Mrs. Celeste, her voice choked with emotion. That night extended into stories, tears, and, surprisingly, some moments of genuine laughter as they shared happy memories. When Elizabeth finally said goodbye, it was already past midnight. Robert insisted on taking her home, concerned about the rain that was falling intensely. On the way, they talked about the next steps. Elizabeth mentioned that she needed to call her adoptive parents and tell them about this incredible discovery. "They always supported my search for my biological sister. They'll be happy for me, even with the sad outcome. I'd like to meet them someday," said Robert. "Thank them for raising you with so much love." When they reached the modest building where Elizabeth lived, Robert hesitated before saying goodbye. "Tomorrow is Sunday. Michael is always asking to go to the municipal zoo. Would you like to join us?" The invitation hung in the air like a promise of continuity, of new beginnings. Elizabeth smiled, feeling an inexplicable certainty that she was exactly where she should be. "I'd love to," she replied simply. That night, for the first time in a long time, Elizabeth slept deeply, without the restless dreams that used to haunt her. In her subconscious, the image of her lost sister slowly transformed, no longer an unreachable ghost, but a loving presence that had somehow guided her steps to this moment. The next morning, the sun shone after the night storm, as if announcing a new chapter. Elizabeth woke up with a feeling of lightness she hadn't experienced since childhood. She carefully prepared for the outing, choosing a simple dress that, without realizing it, was very similar to one she had seen Marianne wearing in one of the photographs. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Michael was the first to hug her when she opened the door, his childish energy contagious. "We're going to see the lions and the monkeys," he exclaimed, jumping excitedly. "And then we can have ice cream." Robert observed the scene with a smile on his lips, noticing how his son had instinctively already included Elizabeth in his small world, as if she had always been a part of it. The zoo was full that Sunday morning, families enjoying the sunny day after the rain. Michael ran from one cage to another, marveled at each animal, while Robert and Elizabeth followed at a calmer pace, talking about trivialities, discovering affinities that went beyond the connection with Marianne. "You know," commented Robert as they watched Michael feed the giraffes, "it's the first time since the accident that I've seen him so animated. It's as if your presence brought back something we had lost." Elizabeth smiled, observing the boy who, without knowing it, was the living link between her and the sister she never got to reunite with. "I have the feeling that Marianne somehow planned all this," she replied, "as if, even no longer being here, she found a way to unite us." The afternoon passed quickly, amid smiles, melting ice cream, and memories being built at every moment. When the sun began to set, Michael fell asleep in the back seat of the car, exhausted but happy. "He adores you," commented Robert, looking through the rearview mirror. "And I already adore him too," responded Elizabeth with sincerity. "It's strange how in just 2 days you've become so important to me." When they arrived at Robert's apartment, Elizabeth helped put Michael to bed. The boy, half asleep, held her hand before she left the room. "Aunt Beth, will you come back?" "Tomorrow?" That simple question, asked with sleepy eyes and a childish voice, carried an emotional weight that almost knocked Elizabeth down. Aunt Beth, exactly as Marianne used to call her when they were children. "Yes, Michael," she replied, kissing his forehead. "Tomorrow I'll be here." In the weeks that followed, Elizabeth became a constant presence in Robert and Michael's lives. Her days off were dedicated to outings in the park, improvised movie sessions in the living room with homemade popcorn, and long conversations with Mrs. Celeste, who found in the young woman not only a link to the daughter-in-law she had lost, but a genuine friendship that filled the emptiness of her own solitary life. The restaurant where she worked was only 3 blocks from Robert's architecture office, allowing them to have lunch together occasionally. Those meetings, initially awkward and filled with silences, gradually transformed into moments anticipated by both, where they shared not only memories of Marianne but also their own stories, discovering surprising affinities. On a particularly pleasant September afternoon, Robert invited her for coffee after work. There was something different in his expression, a mixture of expectation and apprehension that Elizabeth couldn't decipher. "I found something in Marianne's office at home," he explained as they walked to the coffee shop. "A sealed envelope with your name on it." Elizabeth's heart accelerated. After almost a month living with her sister's family, there were still moments when the reality of that connection hit her with renewed force. Seated at a discreet table at the back of the coffee shop, Robert took from his folder a brown envelope, slightly yellowed, with the word Elizabeth written in Marianne's unmistakable handwriting. "It was hidden in a false drawer of the desk," explained Robert. "I only found it because I was reorganizing the office to work from home some days of the week." With trembling hands, Elizabeth opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and some official documents. "Dear Beth, if you're reading this letter, it means I've finally found you. I've spent half my life looking for you, my little sister, whom the system took from us so early. I hope you've had a happy life, full of love and opportunities that we didn't have in our early childhood. There's so much I want to tell you, so many stories to share. But there are also difficult truths that I need to reveal, truths about our biological family that might be better to know in person, looking into your eyes. What I can tell you in advance is that our separation wasn't just the result of neglect or poverty, as the social workers made you believe. There were more complex and painful reasons. Documents I recently found attached to this letter suggest that we were deliberately separated as part of a larger scheme involving irregular adoptions. Our biological mother didn't abandon us by choice, Beth. She was a victim of a corrupt system that took advantage of vulnerable women. When she discovered what had happened to me and subsequently to you, she fought to get us back, but she fell ill before she could succeed. Her last request was that I never give up on finding you. There's more, much more for us to talk about. Please come see me as soon as you can. Robert and Michael will love you as much as I do. Finally, our family will be complete again. With all my love, Marianne. The silence that followed the reading was profound and laden with emotion. Elizabeth wiped away the tears that ran freely down her face as she examined the attached documents, copies of old court proceedings, newspaper clippings about an investigation into illegal adoptions in the 90s, and a death certificate for Helen Oliver, dated 2005, her biological mother. "She never mentioned any of this," said Robert, his voice laden with surprise. "I knew there was trauma in her past, but I didn't imagine this dimension." "So our mother didn't abandon us," murmured Elizabeth, a truth that redefined the entire narrative she had constructed about her origin. "She tried to find us. And Marianne continued that search for both of you," completed Robert, gently holding Elizabeth's hand on the table. "Until the end." That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. The revelations contained in the letter spun in her mind like a whirlwind, deconstructing truths she had accepted all her life. At 3 in the morning, she made a decision. She needed to fully understand that story. The next morning, she called her adoptive parents in Riverside. The conversation was difficult, filled with loaded pauses and hesitant explanations. "We always knew there was something strange about the process," her adoptive father, Charles, finally admitted. "The documents arrived very quickly, without the usual bureaucracies. But we were so desperate to have a child that we didn't ask questions." "You were deceived too," concluded Elizabeth, feeling the weight of the truth. "I don't blame you for that, Dad. I could never. You gave me a wonderful life. We've loved you from the first moment, daughter." The voice of her adoptive mother, Lucy, sounded emotional in the background. "But we always supported your search for answers because we felt there was something unresolved in this story." Upon hanging up, Elizabeth made another decision. She would resign from the restaurant and dedicate a few months to thoroughly investigating the past. With her savings and Robert's moral support, she could finally find all the answers that both she and Marianne had sought. When she communicated her decision to Robert that night, she was surprised by his reaction. "Actually, I was about to propose something similar to you," he confessed. "I have accumulated leave at the office that I never had the courage to take. Maybe we can do this together. Michael will start school, vacation in 2 weeks, and it would be good for him to participate in this journey too." The proposal was tempting. The idea of undertaking that investigation with support, instead of alone, brought a comfort that Elizabeth hadn't expected. "You would do this for me?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "It's not your battle." "Marianne dedicated years to this search," he replied simply. "It was important to her, so it's important to me too. Besides," he briefly hesitated, "you've become part of our family, Elizabeth, and families support each other." Those words reverberated deeply in Elizabeth. Family. After a lifetime searching for lost connections, she now found people willing to embark on her journey, to share her burden and her search. In the 2 weeks that followed, they meticulously organized the trip. The plan was to start in Riverside, where Elizabeth grew up and where Marianne was going when she suffered the accident. Then they would continue to the small town in Virginia where the sisters had been born. Mrs. Celeste, although concerned about the emotional journey they would face, supported the decision. "Marianne would have done the same," said the lady, helping to prepare the suitcases. "In fact, she did. She spent years seeking answers and seeking you, Elizabeth. Now you will together conclude what she began." The eve of departure coincided with Elizabeth's last day at the restaurant. Mrs. Carmen, understanding as always, organized a small farewell with the team. "You will always have a place here when you return," assured the owner, handing her an envelope with a letter of recommendation and a small bonus. "Some journeys need to be completed so we can move forward." That night, Elizabeth slept in Robert's apartment, in the guest room that gradually accumulated small belongings of hers. Michael had insisted that she stay so they could leave very early, like a real expedition. "We're going to discover all the secrets, Aunt Beth," exclaimed the boy as she tucked him into bed, "like detectives in the stories you read to me." The simplicity with which the child viewed that trip as a great adventure, without the emotional weight that adults carried, brought a necessary balance. For Michael, it was just about learning more about his mother and his new aunt. a family, story like any other. Robert, on the other hand, carried his own apprehensions. After Michael fell asleep, he found Elizabeth on the balcony contemplating the city lights. "I've been thinking a lot about what we might discover on this trip," he confessed. "Some truths can be painful." "I'm prepared," responded Elizabeth, although a part of her questioned that statement. "I've spent my entire life with questions without answers. Even if it hurts, I need to know." "I understand that better than you imagine," said Robert, leaning on the balcony beside her. "After the accident, I spent months trying to reconstruct Marianne's last days, understanding why she was on that road, what she had discovered. It was as if, by knowing all the details, I could somehow change the outcome, even knowing it was impossible." "And did you find what you were looking for?" "Not completely. There were missing pieces. Now I understand that you were one of those pieces." He paused, looking directly at her. "Elizabeth, regardless of what we discover, I want you to know that you're already part of our family. Nothing will change that." That promise, made under the starry sky on the eve of an uncertain journey, sealed a silent pact between them. They weren't just two adults seeking answers about the past. They were two people rebuilding a future from the fragments left by those they loved. Morning brought with it the excitement of departures. Michael, vibrant with energy, could barely contain himself as the car was loaded. Mrs. Celeste, who would stay taking care of the house, prepared sandwiches and thermos bottles of coffee for the first part of the journey. "Call when you reach Riverside," she recommended, distributing tight hugs. "And don't forget that, regardless of what you find, what matters is what you do with that information from now on." The wisdom of that woman, tempered by years of experience and her own losses, was a beacon that illuminated the uncertain path ahead. Elizabeth hugged her with special affection, feeling in that gesture the maternal welcome she so associated with her adoptive parents. The trip to Riverside would take approximately 4 hours. In the back seat, Michael alternated between electronic games and animated observations about the landscape. On the radio, old songs created a nostalgic soundtrack for the journey. "It's strange," commented Elizabeth after a long period of contemplative silence. "I'm following the same path that Marianne was taking when—" She couldn't complete the sentence. Robert lightly squeezed her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them in the past weeks. "But with a different purpose," he completed. "She was seeking to find. We are seeking to understand." The first stop was at a roadside diner where Michael could stretch his legs and the adults could refill their coffee. The boy, absorbed in his own world of discoveries, ran between the tables observing the other travelers, creating imaginary stories about their destinations. "He has the same insatiable curiosity as Marianne," observed Robert, following his son, with his gaze, always wanting to know the story behind each person he encountered. "And the same energy," complimented Elizabeth, smiling. "I vaguely remember how Marianne was as a child, always in motion, always asking questions." Those small memories, fragments of an interrupted childhood, emerged more frequently now, as if the proximity to her sister's family awakened memories long dormant. Riverside appeared on the horizon shortly after noon, its urban landscape cut against the blue September sky. For Elizabeth, returning to that city as a woman in search of answers, no longer as the girl who had grown up there, brought a feeling of simultaneous estrangement and familiarity. They stayed at a simple hotel downtown, strategically located, near her adoptive parents' house and the courthouse, where they hoped to find the processes mentioned in Marianne's documents. After settling in, the first commitment was dinner at Charles and Lucy's home, Elizabeth's adoptive parents. The reunion was charged with emotion. The couple, now in their 60s, received Robert and Michael with the same warm affection they had always dedicated to anyone important in their daughter's life. "So this is the famous Michael," exclaimed Lucy, hugging the boy, who immediately became enchanted with the homemade sweets offered by the lady. "Elizabeth has told us so much about you." Charles, more reserved by nature, firmly shook Robert's hand. "Thank you for supporting our daughter on this journey," he said, his voice choked with contained emotion. "We know how much this means to her." During dinner, they deliberately avoided the main subject that had brought them there, They talked about pleasantries, laughed at stories from Elizabeth's childhood, and observed how Michael quickly won over the elderly couple with his contagious energy and endless questions. It was only after dessert, when Michael was taken by Lucy to see Elizabeth's old room, full of toys kept over the years, that the conversation took the inevitable turn. "We brought all the documents we had about your adoption," said Charles, placing a folder worn by time on the table. "It's not much, but maybe it will help." The folder contained the official adoption certificate, some photographs of Elizabeth newly arrived in the family, and correspondence exchanged with the adoption agency, now defunct. "We always found the speed of the process strange," explained Charles. "Normally, adoptions took years, but in your case it was just weeks between our registration and your arrival." "The lawyer who mediated everything assured that everything was legal," added Lucy, who had returned to the room. "But we were never allowed to meet your biological family or the exact circumstances of the separation." Robert, who analyzed the documents with an attentive look, noticed something. "The same name appears in some of the documents that Marianne collected," he commented, taking the papers found in the envelope from his folder. "Dr. August Mitchell, attorney specializing in adoptions." "Yes, it was he who conducted the entire process," confirmed Charles. "A very elegant and articulate man. He assured that your biological mother had voluntarily relinquished custody and that there were no other interested family members." "Which we now know is not true," concluded Elizabeth, feeling a wave of indignation grow within her. "Our mother never abandoned us voluntarily, and Marianne, as the older sister, had the legal right to be consulted." The night extended into discussions about the next steps. Charles, who had worked as an accountant at the local courthouse before retiring, offered to help access the old processes. Lucy, in turn, remembered an old friend who worked at the registry office where the original documents had possibly been registered. "We'll do everything in our power to help," the couple assured. "We always knew this day would come, and we always believed in your right to know your complete story." When they finally returned to the hotel, it was already past midnight. Michael had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted after the long trip and the excitement of the day. Robert carried him carefully to the room, while Elizabeth organized the collected documents. "Your parents are incredible people," commented Robert, returning to the small suite's living room. "Now I understand where your determination and integrity come from." "I was very lucky," agreed Elizabeth. "Despite everything we've discovered about the irregularities in the process, I can never regret having been raised by them. That's what makes this situation so morally complex," reflected Robert, sitting beside her. "On one hand, there was clearly a crime, a forced and painful separation. On the other, you grew up loved and protected, with opportunities that perhaps you wouldn't have had in other circumstances." "Which doesn't justify what was done," completed Elizabeth firmly. "Other children may not have been as lucky, and our lives were irrevocably altered by decisions made without our consent or knowledge." Robert nodded, understanding the complexity of the feelings she was facing. "Tomorrow will be a long day," he said, standing up. "We should try to rest." Before they said goodbye in the hallway that separated their rooms, Robert hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more. For a brief moment, the air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. "Thank you for being here with me," said Elizabeth, breaking the silence. "I don't know if I would have had the courage to face all this alone." "You're not alone, Elizabeth," he replied simply. "Not anymore." That night, as she watched the city lights through the hotel window, Elizabeth thought about how her life had completely changed in just 1 month. From a lonely young woman in search of lost connections, she had become part of an unexpected family, united not just by blood or legal documents, but by conscious choices made day after day. Tomorrow they would face bureaucracies, revisit old documents, and possibly discover painful truths. But they would do it together, she, Robert, and Michael, continuing the journey that Marianne had started years before. And in this unlikely union, they all found a new form of healing. Winter had arrived with all its intensity, but inside the house that now sheltered Robert, Michael, and Elizabeth, the warmth of feelings overcame any external temperature. 3. Months had passed since the young waitress had entered their lives, filling spaces that seemed impossible to be occupied again. Elizabeth now spent more time at their house than in her small apartment. Michael ran into her arms as soon as she crossed the door, and Robert observed with a mixture of joy and nostalgia this new family configuration that was drawing itself before his eyes. "Aunt Beth, look what I did at school today!" exclaimed Michael, extending a drawing where 3 stick figures, a smaller one between 2 larger ones, smiled under a bright yellow sun. Elizabeth knelt down, getting to the boy's height. "Here's beautiful, Michael. It's the 3 of us, isn't it?" Her eyes sparkled as she analyzed each detail of the childish drawing. "Yes, and here," he pointed to a cloud in the upper corner of the paper where another figure floated, "is Mommy watching over us from heaven." Robert, who was preparing dinner in the kitchen, felt a lump in his throat. It was surprising how his son dealt with Helen's absence with a wisdom that many adults didn't possess. That night, after Michael fell asleep, Robert and Elizabeth sat on the balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and conversations that seemed endless. The gentle wind tousled her hair, so similar to Marianne's, but Robert now managed to see beyond the physical similarities. Elizabeth had her own personality, her own dreams and fears. "Sometimes I catch myself thinking about how it would be if Marianne knew we found each other," confessed Elizabeth, looking at the stars. "Would she be happy? Or maybe uncomfortable?" Robert reflected for a few moments before answering. "Marianne always talked about you with so much love and longing. Her biggest regret was not having managed to find you. And now I'm here, living with her husband and son as if we were a family." "And aren't we?" Robert asked, gently holding Elizabeth's hand. That touch, so simple and at the same time so significant, made Elizabeth blush. Since Marianne's death, Robert had not allowed any romantic feeling to flourish in his heart. But something was changing, and they could both feel it. "Robert, Elizabeth began, but was interrupted by the telephone ringing. It was Mrs. Matilda, the neighbor who occasionally looked after Michael. Her voice sounded agitated on the other end of the line. "Robert, dear, you need to come here. I found some old boxes in the basement that belonged to Marianne. I think you should see this." The next day, Robert and Elizabeth headed to Mrs. Matilda's house. Michael stayed at school, participating in an extracurricular activity. The elderly woman received them with her usual chamomile tea and homemade cookies. "I was organizing the basement when I found these boxes," she explained, pointing to 3 cardboard boxes yellowed by time. "Marianne asked me to keep them shortly before the incident. She said they were memories from a past that she wasn't yet ready to revisit." Robert and Elizabeth exchanged intrigued looks as they approached the boxes. The first contained old photographs, some already faded, showing 2 small girls smiling in an orphanage. On the back of one of them, in Marianne's childish handwriting, was written, "Me and my little sister Beth together forever." "She kept this all these years," murmured Elizabeth, with tears in her eyes. The second box revealed documents from the adoption process, both Marianne's and Elizabeth's. There were also letters that Marianne had written but never sent, addressed to a sister she didn't know where to find. It was in the third box, however, that they found something that would change everything. A diary where Marianne reported not only the pain of separation, but also her discoveries. In the last months before the accident, she had hired a private investigator to find Elizabeth. "She knew where I was," Elizabeth said with a choked voice, reading the last pages of the diary. "She was planning to look for me at that restaurant the day after the accident." Robert felt as if the world around him was spinning. Fate had been cruel and generous at the same time. It took Marianne from them but brought Elizabeth through. Michael, who with his child's eyes recognized in the waitress traces of the mother he barely remembered. They returned home in silence, each absorbing the revelations of that day. Michael was waiting for them, eager to show a new drawing. This time the 3 stick figures were holding hands, forming a perfect circle. The following weeks flowed with a new understanding. Elizabeth officially moved into the house, occupying the guest room. Michael was radiant to have his aunt living with them, and Robert, fighting against feelings that grew each day, tried to establish limits that his heart insisted on surpassing. One night, while they were tidying up the kitchen, after dinner, Robert and Elizabeth worked in silent harmony. Their movements seemed choreographed, as if they had shared that space for years. "I think we need to talk about what's happening between us," Robert finally said, breaking the silence. Elizabeth stopped drying the plate she was holding. "Robert, I don't know if this is right. Marianne was my sister, and I loved her deeply. I still love her in a way that will never disappear," he replied, approaching her. "But what I feel for you is different. It's not a substitution, it's something new, unexpected. Michael is so young. How would he understand this?" "He already understands, more than we imagine. Yesterday he asked me why I don't give you a kiss like I gave Mommy." Elizabeth couldn't contain a smile. "And what did you answer?" "That some feelings need time to grow, like the plants he cultivates at school." The telephone interrupted the conversation again. It was the investigator that Marianne had hired, and that Robert had decided to keep working on the case. There was an important discovery. The next day, Robert, Elizabeth, and Michael headed to the registry office in the neighboring town. The investigator was waiting for them with a folder full of documents. "It was difficult to unearth this," he explained, "but I managed to trace the whole story. Marianne and Elizabeth weren't just sisters because they lived in the same orphanage. They were blood sisters, daughters of the same mother." The revelation hit Elizabeth like a wave. All her life she had believed she was just an abandoned girl with no biological ties to anyone. Discovering now that Marianne was her true sister brought a new meaning to everything. "There's more," continued the investigator. "Your mother didn't abandon you by choice. She was very ill and, unable to care for her daughters, was forced to give you up for adoption. Before she passed away, she left letters for both of you." He extended 2 yellowed envelopes, one addressed to Marianne, the other to Elizabeth. Marianne's letter had never been delivered, and now it was in Elizabeth's hands, the only one who could read it. With trembling hands, Elizabeth first opened her own letter. The words of a mother she never knew flowed with love and pain. She described how Elizabeth was as a baby, her first smiles, how her little eyes sparkled when she saw her older sister. The letter ended with a request: "Find your sister, my little one. You are all that remains of each other in this world." Marianne's letter contained similar words with the same final request. It was as if their mother, even without knowing, had foreseen that one day they would need to find each other. At the end of that afternoon, Robert, Elizabeth, and Michael visited the cemetery where Marianne was buried. They brought fresh flowers and a newly framed photo, the old photograph from the orphanage with the 2 little smiling sisters. Michael ran between the tombstones, chasing a blue butterfly that seemed to dance around him. Robert and Elizabeth watched hand in hand as the boy laughed under the late afternoon sun. "Marianne united us," said Robert, looking at his wife's tombstone. "I'm sure she would be happy to see her family reunited." Elizabeth squeezed Robert's hand. "I promised her, through that letter, that I would take care of her family. I never imagined it would be like this." Robert turned to face her. "I'm in no hurry, Elizabeth. We can build this slowly, respecting the memories and building new ones." At that moment, Michael came running back, his breath panting from running so much. "The butterfly landed on Mommy's stone. She's saying hello to us." The 3 embraced in front of Marianne's grave, a family rebuilt in a way none of them could have imagined. The blue butterfly flew in circles around them before disappearing into the orange horizon. Months later, in a simple ceremony in the garden of the house, Robert and Elizabeth sealed their commitment. It wasn't a traditional wedding, but a celebration of the love that had blossomed among the scars. Michael, now almost 7 years old, proudly held the rings. "I promise to honor my sister's memory by loving you both with all the intensity she deserves," said Elizabeth in her vows. Robert, with teary eyes, responded, "And I promise to build a life where the past is honored, but doesn't prevent us from finding happiness in the present." When they returned inside the house, Michael ran to his room and came back with a new drawing. This time the stick figures were all holding hands: Robert, Elizabeth, Michael, and floating above them, not only Marianne, but also the mother of the 2 sisters. "Now we are a complete family," declared the boy with the wisdom that only children possess. "Some are here," he pointed to them, "and others are here," he touched his little heart. Robert and Elizabeth smiled, understanding that the journey that had begun with a tragedy had transformed into something beautiful. Fate, sometimes cruel, had woven for them a tapestry of redemption and second chances. And so, under the watchful eye of the stars, that family forged in the unlikely encounter between a widower, his son, and the lost sister of his wife, moved forward. Not as a substitute for what they had lost, but as a new configuration of love that, like the phoenix, rises from the ashes, stronger and brighter. Each morning, when the sun rose over that house full of laughter and memories, it seemed that Marianne smiled at them, satisfied to see that her last wish had been fulfilled in the most unexpected and wonderful way possible. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Robert, Elizabeth, and little Michael has touched your hearts. Love has many forms, and sometimes arises from the most unexpected places, connecting souls that fate separated only to reunite in surprising ways. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here on the left side of the screen. If this narrative awakened something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexities of life, love, and second chances. Don't miss our upcoming content and share with us in the comments. Have you ever experienced a coincidence that completely changed the course of